Okay, so in our previous lesson, in our first lesson, we were exploring the JCD Lite interface. In this lesson, we'll be focusing on some of the shape tools and commands, learning how to create shapes, move them, or more broadly speaking, translate them, and also how to edit the shapes. We will also move on to creating sketches in our 2D environment, and then we'll look at how we can use these in our 3D environment. Okay, so let's get started. Here we are on our startup screen for JCD Lite. I'm going to create a new file by coming into the ribbon panel under the Quick Primer tab, left click on the new icon, okay, and I want to create a blank file, and remember, do not use the default template. For a blank file, we scroll down within the templates to the generic template. This will give us a blank 3D environment to work from. Okay, so left click on it. Let's name our part. Okay, so we have our name. Let's left click on OK to create our file. And we're here in our 3D environment. Okay, so we're going to be looking at some of the commands available to us in this shape ribbon panel. Okay, we're going to start off by creating a simple block as we did in the previous lesson. So in this case, when we want to create the block, we come down to the icon, left click, and this will open up our input manager for the block command. Okay, so at the top of the input manager for this block command, we see we have several options available to us in terms of how to define the block that we want to create. So for example, this first one, the center define, allows us to pick a first point which will be at the center of the block, and then we can pick a second point which will define the corner of the block. Okay. So if we left click for the center, we can then drag out and create the size of the block that we want. We can then use our direct editing arrows to make quick modifications to our block, or we can use exact numbers by using our dimensions in the input manager. So let's say I want a block that is 30 millimeters in length. Type in 30, press enter. With a width of 30, enter. And I will give it a height of 20 millimeters. Okay, so there is our block with those dimensions. Let's say for the sake of it, we would like to use the corner to corner defining method. If we select it, it will change the definition of our block. If we want to change the points that we have picked, we can come into it, left click, go to the screen, and we can repick our first point, left click to place it. We can repick our second point by clicking in our second point field and repicking on space, and you will notice that even when we pick a point, our block is not updating to this point, and that's because we have defined our length, width and height already and we have locked these in using these little lock icons. So if we unlock these by left clicking on them, the block will define to our point. But we can also change these again. Okay, so we have two other options available to us, where we pick a center and then define the height, or pick a corner and define the height. I will not go into further detail on these now. So let's use our original picking. Let's redefine it. We can redefine it by picking our point on space, or we can start from scratch by erasing the content of the 2 point tabs, and then we can start from scratch. So let's say we pick our center point at 0, 0, 0. Now we can define the size of the block using our second pick point. Okay, alternatively, if we just pick the same point as we did for the first point by left clicking, you can see that they're the same here. We can then go straight into our dimensions and dimension it from here. And I'm using the scrolling wheel mouse here to scroll up and down the dimension of our block. So let's put it back to 30. Give it a width of 30. Height of 20. Okay, so if we want slightly more precision when we come to picking our points, and we will need this frequently during our designing processes, we have several pick options available to us. And these can be accessed by clicking on this icon here, the green arrow and the black arrow. It gives us a panel of picking options, or snap tools, that gives us more precision when snapping to exact points on other entities, and we'll be using these more in the future. So what you will also see in here is our Boolean option panel. Okay, so we are only able to have this first one selected, and this means that our block will be brought in as a base, which means it will be its own separate entity. Okay, it will not be joined to anything else. And the reason we cannot use these other Boolean options, add, remove, intersect, is because currently we have no other entities within our 3D space, so we have nothing to add it to. And remember, if you need help on how to carry out a command and how to fill in the input manager, we can click on our information panel for a brief description of the command, and we will get further details by pressing F1 on the keyboard. And we have detailed instructions of how to use this command. Pressing F1 will give you the same result as clicking on this question mark here. Okay, so let's confirm our block command. Confirming it here, over here, or clicking the middle mouse button. Okay, so we have our block, and you'll see it was added into our history manager as a base. Okay, so let's save our work. It is important to frequently save your work, because it is a real pain if your computer happens to crash or the software may crash. You do not want to lose all the work you have done, so save frequently. Either in the quick access toolbar, the save icon, or file save. And you'll see that there is a hotkey to save, Control S. So we can press Control on the keyboard and S together to name it. It's already named as lesson 2, which is what we want. Okay, and then we click save. Okay, so now let's bring in a second block so we can explore the Boolean options that I mentioned just earlier. So let's scroll out a little bit on our shape using the middle scroll wheel. Position it how we would like it. Using the right mouse button to pan around the object. Okay, so we'll bring in a second block. So I'm going to pick my first point, and this time I'm going to use a picking command to give me a greater accuracy when picking my first point. So let's say I want to pick my first point and have the center of the block right here at the midpoint of this edge on our first block. So I can do this by right clicking, or I can come in here to the drop down arrow and have our pick options as well. So let's choose the middle, which will allow us to pick the point in the middle of a curve or edge. Okay, so now I hover my cursor over this edge. The edge highlights and you can see it throws in the preview. So click to select, and then we are on to our second point definition. And I'm going to pick the same point as the center point. And then I can define my block dimensions. Okay, so then looking at these points, we can see, if we let our cursor hover, that we used a middle picking command for the first point. And since we have this green arrow here, it means we picked our second point freehand. Okay, by not using any picking commands. If the definition of these points is not making sense to you, i.e. the numbers and what they mean, I will explain that briefly here. Okay, so the first number we have here, 15, refers to the x coordinate, which is the x value. So this means that we have traveled a distance of 15 millimeters in the x direction, and this is the x direction here, and we have traveled 15 millimeters along in that direction. Okay, and the second number, this defines the y coordinate, the y value, and it is 0. That means we have traveled a distance of 0 millimeters in the y direction, and this is the y direction. Okay, and finally we have our z coordinate, z value. This is the z direction up here. You can see it from here. So we have traveled a distance of 10 millimeters in the z direction. So in total we have gone 15 on the x, moved 0 on the y, and then moved up 10 on the z to our center point. Okay, so this is the x, y, z coordinate system. And that's how all of our points within 3D space are defined. Now we can move on to our Boolean panel. As you can see, the other options have opened up in our Boolean panel. We no longer have just the base available. So let's move it back onto the base, and our preview changes slightly. Okay, so if we confirm this operation, our new block will be brought in as a base, as its own separate entity. So let's do that. Confirm. Let's set our entity filter to shape. And then when we hover our cursor over our first block, it highlights, and our second block also highlights, but separately. Okay, so these are two different shapes, and they're separate. They're both bases. So let's bring in another block. We can bring up our previously used command or operation by middle clicking the mouse button. Okay, so we want to bring in another block. and I'm going to use my picking command by right clicking, going to middle, selecting this edge. My second point will be the same as the first point, so that I can have control of my dimensions here. I can also pick this point anywhere I want, and then come in and change my dimensions once again. So this time I'm going to add my block. So you can think of an add boolean being like a solder in the jewelry world. We are joining shapes together. Confirm the operation, and then move our cursor over the shape, and we can see that our first big block is the same shape as our third block, because we added our third block, and our second block is still a separate shape. Okay, so let's repeat the block command. Bring in another block. We can middle click, or we can click on our block here. So I'm going to place my first point as before, right click, middle of this edge. My second point, same. I'm happy with my dimensions, but this time I'm going to use a remove boolean. Okay, and we get the preview here. Let's rotate our view to see what's happening here, and we get the preview of a remove taking place from our main block. Okay, so let's confirm this, and we can see that our block command with the remove boolean removes that block from our initial block. Okay, and now let's bring up the block again by middle clicking. Let's just place it. I'll show you the intersect. Now the intersect is going to find that the area that the shapes intersect in and remove everything else. Okay, so you can see we have just this small block. Okay, so I'm not going to confirm this, but you are aware of what it does. Okay, before we move on, I would like to show you our viewing options available in our drop down menu up here. If you can't see it, click on this blue arrow. Okay, so we navigate into view, left click on it, we have our drop down. Okay, so we have our view options that we see in our document aware toolbar here. But here we can change the layout of our 3D environment. Currently we are set to a full screen. Those of you that have previously been involved within CAD software, you may be used to working in a quad environment. So let's left click on this option, and you can see we have changed our view. We are now viewing our design from 4 different points. We left click in the quadrant to activate it. We can then change the view. This is auxiliary now. So this can be useful for our designing process. It allows us to see several angles at once. We can change the layout of our quadrants by dragging. So I'm just pointing this out, as some of you may prefer to work in this style of environment. I'm going to return to the full screen environment so we can see more easily what I'm doing. So here we also have other options available. I'm going to return to full screen and move to my auxiliary view. So let's bring in a cylinder, and we will learn how to move our shapes. Okay, so I'm going to scroll out slightly, move my object, navigate into the Shape ribbon panel, click on the black drop down arrow, left click on cylinder, I'm going to change my face color to green. Okay, now let's see where we would like to place the cylinder. I'm going to navigate into a top-down view. Okay, let's put our Boolean onto base. Now I'll pick the center of my cylinder. So I'm going to pick this point here, not being too specific. I can now define the radius. Now the length. I'm going to navigate, left click. Okay, so here we have our preview of the cylinder. I want to change the radius. I want to make it a 5. Let me change the step size to 0.1 millimeters. Then I can use the scrolling wheel. I'll change my length to 15. I'm going to bring this in as a base and confirm the operation. So there's our cylinder. Okay, so now I want to move the cylinder. To move a shape, we can come into our move command. Okay, we can left click our move command and it will bring up the move command input manager. Okay, we can also access our move command via edit in the drop down menu, move. Alternatively, we can access it through our right click menu whilst hovering our cursor over our shape that we wish to move. So right click, there we have our move. Okay, and you'll notice that our right click options are context sensitive. This means that our right click options will change depending on where our cursor is located. So if I right click in the vacant 3D environment, I'll have this set of options available. If I right click on my shape, I have a different set available to me. If, for example, I change my entity filter onto face and right click this face, I again have different options available. Okay, so this means that our right click options are context sensitive. So we can move our shape. In the input manager we have several different moving commands available. So first of all, let's pick our entity, which is the shape that we want to move here, the cylinder. Okay, so our first option available is the dynamic move entity. And you will have seen that at our center point of our shape, some arrows have popped up. And this is called the handle. Okay, and we can use the handle to move our shape by left clicking and dragging So I'm going to undo this move by cancelling the command and then re-entering it. Okay, so now let's take a look at our second move option, move from point to point. This allows us to pick a point, our from point, and then we can pick our to point, which is where we would like to move our shape to. Okay, also available is our move along a direction. We have our entity selected. We can then define a direction using our picking tools. We can pick an axis or use other picking commands. Say we want to move along the Y direction. We can pick our Y axis down here, or using our center point here. And this then allows us to define a distance along that direction that we would like to move our entity. Okay, then we also have our rotate around the direction move. So if we select this, we are then able to pick a direction about which we want our entity to be rotated. So let's pick, for example, the Z-axis. We can then define an angle for it to be rotated. Let's pick the Y. Okay, so right now we're going to stick with our initial dynamic move. So this handle is quite hard to see. We can move the handle by coming into the input manager, ticking the move handle only, and then when we click and drag our directions on the handle, it moves the handle only and not our entity. Bear in mind that we're moving the pivot point also, so now we deselect move handle only, and now when we drag our handle, we are moving the entity. So I'm going to move it here. Confirm the operation. Save our work. Okay, so now I may want to use my Boolean options on this cylinder. We can do this by using the combine command in the shape ribbon panel, which we also have access to via our right click options. Right click, combine. Okay, so combine. Okay, so we pick our base, which is what we want to add or remove our cylinder from. So let me pick this shape as our base, and then I can pick an operator, which is my cylinder. So let's add it to this shape. Confirm. And then we can see that this is now one whole shape. Okay, so let's say I intended to remove this shape. I didn't want to add it, I wanted to remove it. I could undo the last operation, either here, or right click, undo, and then carry out the operation again. Alternatively, I can redefine this combine operation that I have already performed. I can do this by right clicking anywhere in vacant 3D space and selecting the first icon on the left, redefine last. This will allow me to redefine the last operation. Okay, alternatively, I can right click on the operation in the history manager and navigate to redefine. Okay, so the other way I showed you on how to redefine an operation in the history manager, I showed you this in the previous lesson, is to drag the model stop in the history above the operation that we want to redefine, release it. We can come into the edit icon and we redefine it. We wanted a remove, confirm, and it removes. Okay, so how about we want to mirror our shape? So let's say we want to have this same remove at the same point on this side. So let's drag our model stop up to before the combine remove. And now we will mirror our cylinder. So we come up to the mirror command, mirror, pick our entity, and then we pick a plane to mirror it across. Okay, so this is where our datums come in useful, particularly our global datums at the center here. So we can't see these datums right now. Let's change our display mode to wireframe, and now we can see our datums. Okay, so if we would like to mirror our cylinder over to the same point on this side, we're going to be picking our plane as the side. Okay, so we can select the datum here. To make it more precise and to avoid picking entities that we do not wish to, we can change our entity filter onto datum plane. Okay, and you can see that our entity filter is more limited than previously. This is because we are within a command operation and we are limited to those entities that apply to our particular field. So let's select datum plane, select side. We can turn off our wireframe display mode. We then have the option to either copy our cylinder or move it. In this case we want to copy it, so we have a mirror of it and the original. The move setting will mirror our cylinder and then remove the original. So we're copying. We also have the Boolean operations available to us. So this mirror command in effect performs a mirror, then also performs a combine operation within the same command. Okay, so we wanted to remove. So we can pick remove to remove our mirrored cylinder and also our original cylinder from the shape. And that will go like this. Alternatively, I can redefine. I can create the mirrored cylinder as its own shape. Okay. Now I can replay this combine remove, and I can perform a new one. Alternatively, I could redefine the combine remove, and I could also include the second cylinder in the operator. I can pick 2. Okay, so let's now quickly check out our copy command within the shape ribbon. So we can left click the copy command icon and it will bring up the input manager. You will notice that this is almost identical to our move input manager, and essentially they are the same thing. Instead of just moving our shape, we are going to be moving the shape and then retain the original. Okay, also up here we have our scale. This allows us to scale our shapes. Okay, so let's pick this block to scale. Select it. We can scale it uniform or non-uniform. Uniform means that it will scale by the same magnitude in all directions, X, Y, and Z directions. And this scale will occur about the center point. Okay, so let's scale it by a factor of 1.1. And what this is doing is multiplying our original dimensions with respect to the center by a factor of 1.1. So let's increase this. Okay, but we also have the option to have a non-uniform scale. This allows us to scale in our X, Y, and Z directions separately. Okay, and these are still with respect to the center. We can change our reference point about which we scale here. I'm going to keep my Z scale the same, my X scale the same. So now I am only scaling on the Y, in the Y direction, by a factor of 1.5. So this should mean, if we confirm the operation, our new dimension here will be 15 millimeters. That's 10 multiplied by 1.5. So the final command in the shape ribbon that I will show you now is the pattern command, or array. We can create an array of a shape. So what I'm going to do is come back in our history, and now I'm going to use my pattern array tool. Okay, so I would like to pattern this shape select pattern, and this has opened up the command in our input manager. We have several options available on our methods of patterning or arraying. Okay, some of these are rather more complex than we need to go into right now. A common one that we use is the circular pattern or circular array. I shall select this. We then pick our base, which is the shape that we want to pattern. We can then pick our direction with which we want to pattern around. So in this case, I'm going to pick the Z axis. You can pick it from either here or here. Or I have access to some pick options by right clicking Z or left clicking on this arrow. I can then change the angle with which I want to pattern my shape. I'm going to set it at 90 degrees. I can then increase my number. Okay, so there's many other options available in this input manager. We will use these in the future, but for now I'm going to keep it simple. This is the pattern that I would like. Okay, and we have our Boolean options available, like before. We can add the pattern to our block or remove it. I'm going to add them all as their own shapes. Okay, so let's confirm the command. These are all then their own shape. Okay, so now let me quickly show you one more feature of the Boolean. So let's add another block. I'm going to bring it in as a base. Right here. Okay, so let's say we want to remove this shape, but we want to remove it only from our center big block and leave this block here untouched. We can do this by specifying a Boolean shape. Okay, so then it will only Boolean remove from our specified shape. There we go.